Hey guys, I'm Samitha Sankara, a junior at Ardrey High School in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I do Extemp. So today's video is going to be about how to manage your prep time. Now, as you all know, in Extemp, you get 30 minutes of preparation time to plan out a full 7-minute speech, which can kind of be scary at first because you have to include sources and it should be with near flawless delivery. But you're going to have a game plan, and that's what we're here to help you with. So first things first, you need to keep your own time. Now, some prep room runners at locals are pretty nice, and they'll give you little time signals like, oh, for speakers, you have 15 minutes of prep left, but you can't count on that. So it's best to just get your own stopwatch because some locals don't let you use your phone either. Now, typically the way the prep time is divided, you spend about 15 minutes, more if you're a beginner and less if you're more experienced, of planning your speech, and then you spend the rest of your time practicing your speech. Now, the first thing that you do is pick a question. And when you see your question, you probably have 1,000 thoughts racing through your head. Like, do I even know this country? And do I even have sources on this country? But you need to have a game plan. Go straight back to your seat and write down that question word for word, because you're going to be handing the slip to your judge. And if you don't say the question right in your speech, it's not going to go across well. After you write down the question, you want to think of an answer and then start thinking of your 3 points, your 3 tags and reasons why your answer is correct. And this is one place where a lot of novices make their first mistake. They go straight to their files instead of using logical reasoning to come up with their points first. But you want to brainstorm your points first and then go and see if you have some good evidence to back it up. Now, when you start going to your files, when you're writing down your ideas from your sources and planning out what to say, you have to make sure that you don't write things down word for word, because that just takes way too much time, especially if you tend to write really neat and have slow handwriting. Now, this is not a handwriting contest. Like, it's totally okay to have a really messy flow. Just jot down words and basic ideas, not complete sentences. Here's what my flow kind of looks like usually. As you can see, there's not many words on it. I'm just jotting down some ideas that I plan on saying. Now, another thing that can help you make your planning time go by faster is using abbreviations when you write down your sources. For example, if you have a source from the Washington Post on January the 17th, instead of writing down that entire thing, you could just write down over here, WP 1-17. It goes by a lot quicker. So for like the Wall Street Journal, you use the abbreviation WSJ. Now, when you write down your sources, I like to write them down on the side of the red line right here. That way, right before I enter my room, I can just run down them real quick in chronological order of my speech and make sure I got them. Now, one thing that I like to use as a benchmark as I'm going through my prep time is typically for me, and it kind of depends on the person, I finish planning my first reason with its sources at around the 7-minute mark. And a good way to tell this, and so you don't have to keep on looking back at your stopwatch, is whenever you hear the prep room runner say, second speakers come up to draw, or whichever speaker is after you, come up to draw, then you should know, okay, if I'm not done with my first point yet, I should be kind of moving things along. Now, you're going to reach your 15-minute mark, and you should be about done planning your speech. This is where you want to get out of your seat and start walking around and practicing. And do not underestimate the power of doing this, because when I first started out, I would just jot down my ideas, and then I would stare at my paper, and my paper would stare back at me, and I hoped some kind of osmosis would happen and that I would memorize my speech. But it doesn't work. So get out of your seat. And then you want to start pacing around. So it kind of looks like you're at a track meet when you're at some Extemp prep rooms. As you start walking around, you can't exactly run through your entire speech beginning from end, because that takes up an entire 7 minutes out of the little time you have left for practicing. So when you first start out, you need to prioritize what you're going to practice. One of the most important things you can practice is the introduction, because the introduction is the very first impression that the judge gets of you. And if you screw up a little bit in your intro or you stumble a little bit too much, it's really hard for your judge to change their impression of you, even if your analysis later on is really good. So make sure you practice your intro pretty good during your prep time and have it nearly word for word. Now, one thing that's tough for a lot of people is making sure the intro is exactly 1 minute and 30 seconds, because like you'll be taught in the videos about timing, your intro needs to be 1 minute and 30 seconds. But when you get time signals, you don't get a 6 down, you get a 5 down. So it's hard to really gauge where that 1 minute 30 is. The best thing you can do for yourself is time your intro during your 30 minutes of prep time. That way you know, oh, did I give a little bit too much background on Russia? Should I be a little bit more concise? Or should I elaborate more on why this trade deal was started in the first place? That way you have some ideas in your mind about pacing before you go into that room. Now, one trick that you can use for memorizing, which can get pretty tough in your 30 minutes when you're trying to scramble in, writing down and practicing your speech, is memorize as you go. It's kind of like, let's say, instead of 30 minutes, you had 30 days to study for a history test, which I actually do, funnily. And you want to start studying for that test ahead of time and not just the 2 days before. And just like that, you want to start kind of priming your brain for the sources that you're using beforehand, like as you're writing down your points even. That way when it comes to really hardcore memorizing and making sure you got everything down, you're not cramming. You at least saw the stuff before. So one thing that I like to do is write down my first point, and then as I'm writing down my sources, before I move down to my second point, first I look, okay, Brookings, high school competition, BBC, education, okay, good to go. Second point. And then I start writing down my ideas for my second point. That way you at least had some kind of primer in your brain. And after that, one thing you want to make sure is coming up with words for each of your taglines that you can keep in your mind before you go into your room. And this is especially helpful for people who often blank when it comes to their speech. So I actually have a big problem with this. I'll be in my middle of my speech and I'll be like, the answer is yes, for 3 reasons. First, because... And then I completely blank out. But the one good way to avoid this is come up with a word for each of your contentions. So you got 3 words running through your mind as your judge is writing down the question. Okay, infrastructure, education, economy. Infrastructure, education, economy. And then you'll be good to go. So don't freak out if when you first start out, you actually spend about 22 minutes or so planning. It's okay. If you're having trouble memorizing, focus on memorizing your 3 reasons. Then, as you're speaking, you can improvise some of your substructure if you just didn't have enough time to make sure you really got it solid in your 30 minutes. The best thing you can do for yourself, though, is not freak out. Don't worry, it takes time to get used to, but best of luck as you're preparing for tournaments.